What's up, guys? Welcome to the NFL Week 14 Stack Show. We've got a lot of interesting games this week, a lot of ways to get different, including stacking the game of the week. And we'll get into it after this. What's up, guys? I'm Simon Edwards at PumaCom with Heatseeker Sports, and you're watching the Stack Show, looking at NFL Week 14 from a Draftkings perspective this week. Going to take a look at the slate and pick out some of the best matchups on the slate tonight or this week. And I'll get into that in a second. Before I do that, make sure to hit the like button on this video, hit the subscribe button. Looking for 300 subscribers. I just crossed 200 the other week. I got looking at 211 right now. So I'm trying to get up to 300 before the end of the season. Going to start a lot of best ball playoff content starting probably next week. I'm taking a look at the potential matchups and trying to get an idea of how I want the bracket to go and the teams that I think will make it the furthest in the playoffs. I've had some good success with that over the last couple years. I ended up picking the finalists in the Cincinnati versus whatever the Super Bowl was 2 years ago, Rams Super Bowl. And last year I had Cincinnati and San Francisco and Philly all making it into the conference finals. And two of those teams obviously were eliminated before making it to the Super Bowl. We got the Eagles in the Super Bowl, though. So had a couple good years in a row on that. I'm going to be doing another year this year, and we'll see how that goes. But this week, we are focused on the Week 14 slate, and I'll get into that. Looking at a very interesting slate this week, there was a game in the Kansas City-Buffalo game that I thought for sure was going to be the chalkiest game on the slate, but I don't really look at any DFS content throughout the week because I'm so focused on my showdown shows and those contests that I usually don't take a look at ownership and stuff like that until Saturday. And here we are on Saturday night, and I'm looking at the ownership on that Buffalo game, and I'm shocked at the ownership on the Buffalo side of that game. This is a game that has popped off several times in the recent history, and this week it's looking like it's going to be an under-owned game. So if those projections hold, then that is going to be the game of the week for us to stack. It's not a cheap stack by any means, but we do have other cheap options on this slate. I was getting ready to talk about how I wanted to stack Joe Flacco this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars and how cheap he is, but he's another option that we can look at if we want to get cheap at the quarterback position. But right now, I really like that Josh Allen to Stephon Diggs stack. I know it's a tough matchup, but this is the type of game where you don't look at matchups because these guys can pop off for monster games against any opponent. And this is the type of week that we hope for when we're playing DFS, where we can get opportunities like this to go heavy on a game that seems to be lower owned than it should be. But I'll take a look at that in a minute. First, we'll take a look at this matchup between the Tampa Bay Bucks and the Atlanta Falcons. Not too interested in this game. It is a 40.5 point total, which is not that great. Atlanta has just been way too unpredictable with their studs this season, and I just don't like that team in general. But if you wanted to go there, slot receivers for Atlanta have the best matchup, with Tampa Bay giving up 30 DraftKings points a game to that slot receiver. But like I said, I'm not really interested there. Tight ends also have a decent matchup against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay giving up 14.1 DraftKings points a game. If we're looking at our tight ends for Atlanta, we got Kyle Pitts, who has been super inconsistent, and he has only crossed double-digit points 2 times this year. but he's in a good matchup, and he could do that at any week. So if you like Kyle Pitts, I don't blame you there. And Jonnu Smith is another guy. He's had a lot more success than Kyle Pitts this season. And last couple weeks, he hasn't done anything. So I would imagine that his ownership is going to be pretty low. 3,100 is his salary. That's not too bad for his matchup this week. So consider Jonnu Smith in your player pool this week. Other than that, I would not consider either the running backs. I'm not considering really any of the wide receivers. Mike Evans, you can always leave in your player pool. The guy is a stud this year, and him and Baker have a really good connection. He's getting all of Godwin's targets this year. So, yeah, Mike Evans is in a good situation this year. And with the amount of opportunity that he gets, you can never write him off. And the slot receiver for Tampa Bay looks like he has a good matchup, but it's Trey Palmer in that slot role. And I don't know how much I want him in my lineups, but the Falcons are giving up 21 DraftKings points a game to that slot position. So Trey Palmer is a guy that you might want to keep on your radar this week. Other than that, I'm not really interested too much in anyone in this matchup. Godwin does have a 36% target rate in the slot. So, maybe Godwin would pop off in this game as opposed to Mike Evans. Mike Evans gets 28% of his routes from the slot too. So, I mean, Mike Evans probably ultimately would be the only guy that I would like to lean to. I just don't trust these other receivers. When Baker Mayfield locks in on a guy, that's his guy. And then this year it's Mike Evans. So I would maybe consider Mike Evans in this matchup, keep him in your player pool, but I don't really like too much else about this matchup. Looking at the next game, Rams and the Ravens, I like Baltimore in this game. I like the situation that Lamar Jackson is in. And he's another guy. He hasn't, he's had one big game recently, but he hasn't really done too much. I was looking at a tweet, and it was comparing the stats of Lamar Jackson to Daniel Jones. There's a lot of talk on Lamar Jackson winning MVP this year. And you look at his stats, and they're comparable to Daniel Jones's stats. So, I mean, that kind of really puts things in perspective when you got a perception of a guy like Lamar, who is a former MVP. His team is doing well this year, and they were a number one seed. I think they're still the number one seed in the AFC, but I mean, that's mainly on the backs of the defense, and I would imagine the running backs, because Lamar has not been doing a whole lot this year. Even with that new offensive coordinator in there, he had a few big weeks early on in the season, but he's really only had 37 points versus Detroit in week 7, and week 11, he had 24 DraftKings points against Cincinnati. So he is in a spot this week where he has a good matchup, and the Rams are a team that are capable of bucking the trend against a matchup and maybe putting up some points on Baltimore and keeping this game competitive. But other than that, I don't really want to start anyone in this game, especially when we got an under-owned Josh Allen lurking out there. So that kind of puts Lamar Jackson a little bit lower on my list than he would have been if Josh Allen was higher owned, because I do like the matchup that Lamar has, but I think with the game script that Baltimore might be able to handle Los Angeles in this game. We're looking at a 39.5 point total on top of that. And there's really no matchups for the Rams to exploit in this one. You're just kind of hoping that, Stafford would be able to pull out some veteran magic or something in this game, but I really don't see it. If I was going to stack Baltimore, I don't mind the Lamar to Zay Jones stacks. Maybe Isaiah Likely in there too. If you want to double stack it, I don't know who I'd run it back with, but if you look at Likely hasn't done much of anything, but he got 6 targets last week. Last week may have been that first full week without Mark Andrews. Yeah, Andrews got hurt in the Cincy game. So last week was the first game that Likely has started since Andrews went down, and he got 6 targets. So that's good. And with, let's see, where's Zay Jones? Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers is the guy that they target against this defense that the Rams run. They run a lot of zone. Zay Flowers, and then Odell Beckham is right behind him as far as the target share. We're looking at a 5,700 salary for Zay Flowers in this matchup, though, and we're looking at Beckham with a 3,800 salary. So Beckham might be, we're going to be looking for value tonight. So keep Beckham in your player pool with that 3,800 salary. That's way too cheap for Beckham in a matchup where the Rams are giving up 18.7 DraftKings points a game to the wide receiver position. And we're looking for cheap wide receivers and cheap positions to get those studs in there from the Bills game. So keep that in mind with Beckham. 18.7 DraftKings points a game going to the wideouts. That is a really good matchup for those wideouts. And also with Likely, what's Likely's salary? Let's check him real quick. Likely has a 3,500 salary. It's a little more expensive than I'd like for considering what he's accomplished so far this year. So I'd probably pass on Likely. And Beckham is a interesting play this week at 3,800. So we're looking for value. Put Beckham in your player pool this week. Moving on, looking at the Detroit-Chicago game. This is another game that I really like this week, and I like it because if you look at the stats, I'm going to look them up real quick here, that Fields has put up against his Detroit team. And I highlighted this when we focused on this game when it was a showdown slate a few weeks ago. And Justin Fields versus the Detroit Lions, as far as his rushing yards, he had 104 rushing yards this year against them when they faced off in week 11, 132 rushing yards against them in week 16 of 2022, 147 rushing yards against them in week 3 of 22, and 2 touchdowns in that same game. And he scored like those rushing touchdowns, but he also has obviously the passing game upside. So I like Justin Fields a lot in this matchup, and I think he's probably going to be owned. We'll take a look at his ownership real quick. Let's see. Looking at Justin Fields' ownership is, let's see, projected at 9.5% ownership this week. So that's not bad at all. I like Justin Fields with that ownership, and I like him in this matchup. He's not overly expensive at 6,800, so he gives us a cheap option, or cheap relative to what kind of points he can put up this week. If I was going to stack Fields, I'd stack him with DJ Moore. DJ Moore's at 6,500. I think we can get an elite output out of DJ Moore in this matchup, just like we did the last time that they played. I had him in the captain, recommended him in the captain, and he ended up being the high scorer of that week with 22.6 DraftKings points. But I like DJ Moore again this week. Now they're playing in Chicago, so it makes him all the more interesting in that setup. And Detroit has been sloppy against receivers recently, so don't write off DJ Moore in this matchup this week. And the most vulnerable that they are is against the slot receivers. They're giving up 23.5 DraftKings points a game to the slot receivers. Only 14.1 DraftKings points a game to wideouts, but I do like DJ Moore in this matchup. I liked him in that matchup earlier on in the season, and I still like him this week. And I think that Justin Fields to DJ Moore is going to be a good stack. As far as runbacks, Chicago is giving up 21.2 DraftKings points a game to slot receivers, which makes Amon-Ra St. Brown a perfect spot tonight or this week. And Amon-Ra is 8,200, so he's a little bit pricey, probably a little too pricey for me. Versus Chicago, last time they played, he put up 21.7 DraftKings points, though, so that's pretty good. And last week he had a little bit of a dud, only 13 DraftKings points a game, 13 DraftKings points versus New Orleans. But as far as what he is projected for ownership, he's under 10% projected ownership, which I like in this matchup. So makes him interesting if you want to go with a game stack attempt at this game. The guy that I really like is Laporta this week. Laporta is 6,100, so he's not cheap. He had 32 DraftKings points last week. It helps explain that. Last game, he only scored 7 DraftKings points against Chicago. But this week, I'm willing to write that off. And he scored, with Chicago giving up 16 DraftKings points a game to that tight end position. I think I liked him in week 11 as well, but obviously didn't come through with only 6 DraftKings points. So Laporta is interesting this week, especially if you want to stack this game. But he is expensive, so kind of proceed with caution there. But I do like the Justin Fields to DJ Moore stacks this week. Maybe even add Cole Kmet in there if you want to, and maybe not run it back with anybody. Maybe just go Fields, Kmet, maybe run it back with Gibbs, even though Chicago's really good against running backs this year. But Gibbs, if this game goes like it did earlier in the season, then Gibbs could get a decent amount of work. He had 21.5 DraftKings points against them in week 11, but they are more vulnerable to Chicago is more vulnerable to receiving running backs than they are to running backs. So they're pretty good against the run. You can see it in the DraftKings points allowed. They're only allowing 19 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. Chicago is allowing an identical 19 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. So both these teams are only allowing 19 DraftKings points a game to each other. Roschon Johnson, just a note on him at 4,900. He was getting a lot of the work last week. He had 10 rush attempts, and he had 5 targets in that game against Minnesota. So 4,900, Roschon Johnson, keep him in your player pool. We're looking for salary relief this week, especially if we want to stack that Kansas City Buffalo game, which is something that I think I'm going to be doing this week. So keep Roschon Johnson in mind. All right, so moving on to the next game. We got Indy at Cincy. This is another interesting game. Everybody's on Browning this week, according to the ownership. I am not personally. I liked Browning and what he did last week, but Browning at 16.7 ownership is not something that I want to do, and he's got a bad matchup on top of it against Indy. I don't know why he's so high owned, other than recency bias. And I haven't listened to any content, so I don't know what people are saying about him. But Indy's only giving up 12 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position, so that is an easy fade on bad chalk for me. On the opposite side, though, Minshew is in a much better spot with Cincy giving up 19 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. That sets up Minshew perfectly, and Minshew is in a situation where he's got Michael Pittman. He's got Josh Downs. He's got plenty of stacking options to go with him. Let's see how those guys have done recently. Pittman has been on a roll lately. 30 DraftKings points last week, 24 DraftKings points the week before that. And he's just had like a lot of big weeks since Gardner Minshew took over. So I like Pittman this week. And Downs has been a little bit down lately, and he has not had a double-digit week since week 8, but he is in a good matchup this week because the Bengals are giving up 18.7 DraftKings points a game to the slot receivers, and Josh Downs also has the best DVOA matchup on this game. So I do like Josh Downs this week, especially at 4,800. He's cheap. We're looking for that salary relief this week. So I do like keeping Josh Downs in my player pool this week. I think he could have a decent game. And another guy that we want to keep an eye on, I don't know if this is going to be the week, but he's got a really good matchup. And when I was doing the analysis on the showdown game that Cincinnati played the other day, Chase Brown was a guy that I saw a lot of the local media hyping up. He had a lot of opportunity last week, and it was something that I was skeptical on going into that game, but I was reading about these beat writers were talking about Chase Brown this, Chase Brown that. So I started a little bit of him in my lineups, and the game started off. I don't think he started, but he was getting a lot of the work in the first, few series of the game. Mixon started to heat up, so he started taking over that role again. But Chase Brown was getting a lot of work, and he ended up with 9 carries for 61 yards. So he was getting 6.8 yards per carry. And this is a team that has struggled with efficiency in their running game, and they're looking to make a change. If Mixon had not caught on, then Chase Brown would have been featured throughout that game, I believe. And the coaches have talked him up, and they gave him an opportunity last week, and he delivered. He just got unlucky because Mixon also delivered, and Mixon had a big game in a game that they were probably thinking that they were going to lose against Jacksonville. They ended up pulling out the upset. So don't be surprised if Chase Brown gets a decent amount of work in this game in a good matchup where the Colts are giving up 27.5 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. I like Chase Brown in this matchup, and I like him at this price at 4,400. It's just $400 off the minimum price for a DraftKings running back. So Chase Brown is a guy to keep in your player pool this week. I don't know if this is the week that he pops off, but this is the matchup to do it. Looking at Mixon. Mixon had 3.6 yards per carry in that game. So his inefficiency continued last week. And Chase Brown was a good change of pace back last week. He looked good out there. Passed the eye test. He was getting 6.8 yards a carry, and he basically doubled what Mixon did. Unfortunately, Mixon got those 2 touchdowns and ended up getting 19 carries in that game. But it was looking like it was going to be the Chase Brown breakout game until Mixon started messing everything up for him. And Mixon ended up, of course, with 30 DraftKings points. So, in a game that Mixon shouldn't have even been relevant, he ended up getting 30 DraftKings points and, ended up just ruining it for Chase Brown. But Chase Brown would have been a sneaky play last week. But that's good for us this week because he's in a much better matchup, and he's going to be next to nothing as far as his ownership. Let's take a look at that. Chase Brown is going to be 0.01% owned this week at 4,400 in a good matchup where he was starting to get usage last week. And don't be surprised if he gets more opportunity this week. If he breaks one off, I could see him breaking off a 30-yard touchdown in this game. And I like Chase Brown as a complete dice roll, crapshoot, whatever you want to call it. But he's a good sleeper in a game like this. So I like Chase Brown in this matchup. Let's see. Zach Moss, he's going to be a popular option this week. Zach Moss, let's check out his matchup. He is popular for good reason because since he is giving up 22 DraftKings points a game to the running back position, since his defense is just trash this year. So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that, just everybody on Indy is going to have a good matchup this week. Everybody, even the tight ends that don't get used. But I like Downs, I like Pittman, I like Zach Moss, and I like Minshew. But on the Cincy side, the main guys that I'm looking at are the running backs and maybe the tight ends. Maybe we look at the Tanner Hudson situation this week because he's got a good matchup. And Tanner Hudson he's only 2,800. I'm surprised they haven't jacked up the price on Tanner Hudson yet. He's been getting a lot of usage. Look at these targets. 4 targets last week, 5 targets the week before that, 4 the week before that, 7 and 5. So he's been on fire with targets. He just hasn't gotten a touchdown. Hasn't gotten a touchdown yet, but that's coming. I could see Tanner Hudson putting up 14 DraftKings points this week if you add a touchdown to this 7.5 point fantasy performance that he seems to be averaging about recently. So Tanner Hudson is just a touchdown away from being a 14 DraftKings point performance for a $2,800 salary. So keep him in your player pool this week. And moving on to the next game, looking at Jacksonville, Cleveland. Cleveland is another interesting game. I kind of hinted at it earlier. I like Joe Flacco in this matchup at 4,700. And what I like about Flacco is when you get these veteran quarterbacks in a good spot, like with a good offensive line, like we were talking about Andy Dalton earlier in the season when Andy Dalton was filling in for Bryce Young, and I was talking about how Adam Thielen was going to have a big night that week, and Thielen ended up going off because he had that veteran presence of Andy Dalton in there. And before that, like Thielen hadn't really done like too much like leading into that. And Dalton just came in as a vet, gave Thielen like a much better opportunity to succeed because Dalton's the guy that can read defenses, not like Bryce Young. Dalton could read defenses. He's a veteran presence coming in. Same thing with Joe Flacco this week. You got a veteran presence coming in with a team competing for the playoffs, and they got a matchup that is beneficial for the passing game of the Browns, even though the total is the lowest total on the slate at 33.5 points. Joe Flacco at under 5K is a guy who's interesting this week, with Jacksonville giving up 21 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. They're also giving up 21.9 DraftKings points a game to the wide receiver position. I could see a veteran connection, Flacco to Cooper. I could see that totally happening this week, and it'll be a cheap stack, and it'll be like almost virtually non-existent as far as ownership. Only problem is a pace down game, and we don't like those pace down games. But if you're looking for salary relief this week for whatever reason, don't go with Browning. Go with Minshew, or go with Joe Flacco. Those guys have the better matchups. Look at what Flacco did last week. I was talking about him last week as well, and he ended up getting 44 pass attempts in a game that they were losing last week, Could be a similar situation this week with Jacksonville. We never know what's going to happen with Jacksonville. They got a lot of good weapons. We got Trevor Lawrence likely out this week. I don't know if it's been officially announced yet that he's out, but Trevor Lawrence is probably going to be out this week. But even better if he does play, because that'll probably put Flacco in a situation of playing from behind. But regardless of that, Jacksonville is much weaker against the the passing game than they are against the running game. So that sets up Cleveland pretty well to have a decent game this week. And take that back a little bit. Jacksonville's given up 23 DraftKings points a game. I'm going from week 5 on. I'm not using the whole season. So Jacksonville's given up 23 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. So I do like Flacco to Cooper this week. I don't know how much we're going to need to use it, especially since I want to start Josh Allen. But if you're looking for cheaper quarterback options, skip Browning and look at Flacco and look at who else did we just cover? Look at Minshew, Flacco and Minshew. So that's a interesting spot there for that Cleveland-Jacksonville game. I think if you're running it back with anybody, I would probably just run it back. The slot receiver is the one that has the best matchup against Cleveland. Cleveland's been giving up 21 DraftKings points a game to the slot. Parker Washington was pretty good last week. I would not be surprised if he gets a decent amount of work. It'd be the perfect spot for Christian Kirk, but Christian Kirk is obviously hurt. Let's see what Trevor Lawrence's situation is. Lawrence is listed as questionable. Sounds like he's going to be a game time decision, but I find it would be hard to believe if Trevor Lawrence is going to start this game, but they are in the playoff hunt. And we saw it with Patrick Mahomes last year when he got his ankle sprain and he came in the next week. He came in the same game, I think. So, he set a precedent with these elite quarterbacks, playing under this type of injury. So don't be surprised to see Lawrence in there, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised to see Beathard. So it could go either way. But if Lawrence is in there, that go even more. So that'll make it more of a competitive game. So moving on to Carolina versus New Orleans. Only guy I'm interested to hear is Alvin Kamara, just because of how bad Carolina is against the run. But I'm also interested in Taysom. But first, Kamara, 29 DraftKings points last week. 16 DraftKings points against Atlanta, 19 against Minnesota. So he's been on a little bit of a tear recently, and he's in a good matchup this week. He's expensive, though, at 8,200. Just to illustrate, Carolina is giving up 27 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. So looking at Kamara's ownership, let's see here. Kamara is going to be, looks like he's under 10% owned, so that's good. Looks like more people are going to be leaning towards Christian McCaffrey this week. So Kamara will be under 10% owned in the best running back matchup that you can have. And on top of that, I'm not sure what Derek Carr's status is, but Carr is questionable. He was in concussion protocol. Not sure if he's going to – he looks like he cleared it late Friday. So not sure if he's going to start necessarily, but if he does start, he loves to target Kamara. So that is even better for Kamara. Let's look at the targets he's gotten recently. 8 targets last week, 5 targets the week before that, 7 targets the week before that. I mean, we look at Kamara and we look at Christian McCaffrey. What's McCaffrey's matchup like here? He is in a really good matchup too. He's actually in a better matchup against Seattle than New Orleans is against Carolina as far as the running back position. So I can see why McCaffrey is going to be the highest owned running back, but Kamara is a good pivot off of McCaffrey. If you want to pivot off of him, he's 8,200 versus McCaffrey, who is 9,200. So you save $1,000 there. They're probably going to get like have a similar performance. So yeah, don't shy away from Kamara in this matchup. I like Taysom Hill as well. Let's see what his situation. He's got a Q. Didn't practice in any fashion this week, so he's probably not going to play from the looks of it. But I liked him last week as well. It felt like a Taysom game, and he ended up scoring 15 DraftKings points, so he had a good game last week. If he plays this week and Derek Carr is out, I like him with Derek Carr out. I probably don't like him as much with Derek Carr in, but the running game matchup makes Taysom Hill very interesting this week. If Derek Carr is out, Taysom Hill becomes that much more interesting. If Taysom Hill, we get a sign that he is not going to be limited, but he did not practice this week, so I don't like that. But keep him in mind this week and keep an eye on his injury report. Maybe do a little digging into that. So moving on to, let's check out and see what other matchups we have here. Carolina's tight end is the only other decent matchup, but I really am only interested in Kamara and Taysom. If it's Jameis Winston, that makes me a little more interested in Chris Olave because Carolina's given up 17.5 DraftKings points a game to the slot, but otherwise it's not a good matchup for the passing game of New Orleans. But if it's Winston, then that makes me a little bit interested in Olave tomorrow. So let's move on to the next game. Get rid of New Orleans. Houston versus the Jets. Don't like this game. Schultz is out. Brevin Jordan is interesting. He's got a good matchup. He's at 3,100 though, which is a little bit pricey. Check out the actual matchup for him. This is another low-scoring game. We got a lot of low-scoring games recently. Me and Spread were talking about that the other day. Spread was talking about something with the offensive lines not being able to play as much together, so it's kind of messing up the offense output. We're looking at New York Jets. They have a much better matchup on the tight end spot with 16.5 DraftKings points a game to tight ends is what Houston is giving up. Houston is also giving up 21 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback and 15 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. So, I mean, Zach Wilson, he's got a narrative brewing this week. He's 4,700. I like Flacco better, but this matchup for Zach Wilson is not a bad matchup. There's been a lot of negative talk about Zach Wilson. So if he comes in with some sort of mentality of somebody who has to prove something, he's had a few games off, a few games to think through his situation and everything that's been happening. Zach Wilson has those moments where he pops off. He had 20 DraftKings points against Kansas City earlier in this year. Don't be surprised if he comes in to this matchup with something to prove. He's had Aaron Rodgers talking him up all week, Aaron Rodgers defending him, and he comes into a situation, must-win game for the team. Team has his back a lot more this year versus last year. Zach Wilson's shown a lot of maturity versus last year, and I would not be surprised if he comes in here. The team has his back, and Wilson ends up having a good performance at home in New York, and they end up pulling off the upset win against Houston. CJ Stroud is going to have a much more difficult matchup against that Jets defense, and the running game is who they're going to have to depend on in this matchup. But Zach Wilson, I would not be surprised if he pulls it off and the Jets are somehow able to upset Houston tomorrow. But I don't want that to happen because I have a bet on Houston to win the division that is live right now. So I want Houston to win this game, but I am a little hesitant about this game on the Houston side. I have a feeling that this is another one of those Jets upset games. It's just brewing in that direction. And, Garrett Wilson in a good matchup too with, like I said, the wideouts are getting 15 points a game from the Jets, from the Houston defense. So Garrett Wilson is only 5,500. He's an elite receiver. We could see a Garrett. We could see a Wilson stacks doing well this week, running it back with Singletary. Singletary's got the best matchup on the Houston side, and there's nothing to stop him because the defense of the Jets are going to be focused more on that passing game. So they're not going to have their attention focused on the run game, and they're weak against the run in general. So that sets up Singletary for a good game at 5,700. This game stack, I don't hate Wilson, Singletary. So keep that in mind. We call this show Cheap Stacks for a reason. So we've gone through a few cheap stacks so far this week that we have not had in the past few weeks. There hasn't been any good cheap stacks, but this week there's a bunch of cheap stacks that are good. And this is one of the ones that I don't hate this week. Minnesota, Las Vegas. Let's see what we got here. Minnesota, Las Vegas is a 40.5 point total. Pretty close spread, only 3 points. Minnesota's favorite. We got a couple teams. Minnesota was on a downward trajectory heading into their bye. Josh Dobbs was, crashing down to earth. He's a spaceman in his other life. And last week he only had 8.5 DraftKings points against Chicago in that game. And prior to that, he was on a bit of a run. So, I do like Josh Dobbs. He's 5,900. I don't like him in this matchup though, because we're dealing with Max Crosby here, and Dobbs is not as good under pressure. And I could see Crosby being all over Dobbs this week and setting him up for failure. So maybe not as high on Dobbs as I normally am. Jefferson is back this week though, so that'll be a huge boon to the offense. Hasn't played since week 5 though, so he could have a little bit of rust, and then he's coming back from an injury. So we could see rust on him. According to reports, there are no restrictions in his return, so they waited until he was 100% to bring him back. So rust seems like it'll be the only concern this week with Justin Jefferson, but I don't think we're going to see much lower ownership on him than this week, I would guess. Let's see what his ownership is going to be. Justin Jefferson is looking at 8.5% ownership. So he's in a good matchup. The Raiders are only giving up 12 DraftKings points a game to wideouts, but Justin Jefferson is a guy that you're not too concerned about matchups, more concerned on the Dobbs side and how he's going to be able to handle that pressure, if he's going to be able to get the ball to Jefferson. The running backs on Minnesota have a much better matchup, but I'm not a big fan of the running backs on Minnesota. But we did see Ty Chandler start to make a move on that starting role a couple weeks ago. He didn't do anything against Chicago, but he got 73 yards against Denver, on top of 4 targets for 37 yards that lost to Denver. So I don't hate Ty Chandler, and we're looking at a 4,600 salary on him. So again, with the salary relief, we got the Vegas Raiders giving up 26.5 DraftKings points a game to the position. And on top of that, Minnesota are the favorites. They're playing at home, I believe. No, they're playing in Las Vegas this week. So, maybe Vegas should be the favorites in this one, but it seems to be, Minnesota's getting, giving the Raiders 3 points this week. So that's kind of interesting. But, this is going to be a close game. It's going to be an interesting game. I do like Tyson Chandler, though, or Ty Chandler in this game at 4,600 with that salary. That's an interesting salary. He's got a good matchup, and he was starting to get a lot of that starting work a couple weeks ago before they ran into that Denver situation last week. So maybe keep Chandler in your player pool. Other than that, Josh Jacobs has a decent matchup. Minnesota is giving up 20 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. Devontae Adams has a good matchup. Minnesota giving up 15 DraftKings points a game to the wideouts. But keep in mind, Aiden Connell is a rookie, and Brian Flores loves to blitz. We've been talking about that all year with Minnesota, so expect a lot of pressure on him this week, on Aiden O'Connell, and I don't like that for a rookie quarterback. But I don't like the Dobbs side either, so it's probably a stay away game, but I could see I would keep Chandler in my player pool, and maybe sprinkle in some Jefferson and Adams. Moving on to the Seattle-San Francisco game. This is another highly touted game. Looking at a Brock Purdy, that's supposed to be the highest owned guy on the slate for quarterback position. Last time against Seattle, he only put up 11 DraftKings points, so he did not do very well, but they blew them out 31-13, so it was probably a situation where they were just relying on the run game more. But Brock Purdy, I like him as an MVP this year. I don't see the case against him. Like Patrick Mahomes, I get that he's not playing with any weapons, but he's not overcoming that either. They're winning on the defense back, and Patrick Mahomes is not an MVP this year. Brock Purdy, in my mind, has been playing a tremendous year. He leads the league in a lot of metrics for quarterbacks, a lot of advanced metrics. And, you can say what you want about the weapons that San Francisco has. Yeah, they have a lot of weapons, but we've seen teams throughout history that have a bunch of weapons where the quarterback wins the MVP. It's really about, the coaching, I think, more than the weapons. And I think that, Brock Purdy stepped into this offense, stepped into the scheme, and he delivered as a highly unlikely guy to deliver in Mr. Irrelevant. He won a boatload of games before he lost his first one, and then he went on a little bit of a losing streak, but now he's back on track, and his stats are intact this year, and he more than deserves like an MVP bid this season based on what he's been able to accomplish. So I do like Brock Purdy on the year, but in this matchup at 6,500, let's take a look at what Seattle is giving up to the quarterback position. It's not a good matchup, not a great matchup, I would say, especially compared to other quarterbacks that we have on the slate. Seattle's only giving up 17 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. On the other side, San Francisco's only giving up 14 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. So it's much more of a Christian McCaffrey type of game than it is a Brock Purdy type of game. But if they want to help Purdy make a push for the MVP, then that is where I could see them giving him a lot of more opportunity. And it is a 46.5 point total on the game, with San Francisco at 30 points. And if we're looking at, they're playing in San Francisco, so they're playing at home, and you can just hear the MVP chants like happening during this game as they're giving Brock Purdy opportunity. So maybe he's not such a bad play, but that's all based on narrative, and it is a good spot for him to do some damage. But I do think that there are better spots on the slate this week. As far as who would benefit, I think Samuel has the best matchup again this week, with the Seattle being more vulnerable to the slot receivers, and Samuel's running 29% of his routes from the slot, but he's one of those utility guys, and he's been on fire these last few weeks. We're seeing the Samuel that we saw a couple years ago. Let's take a look at what he's done. These last few weeks, he had 39 DraftKings points versus Philly. I liked Kittle in that game, and it bit me in the ass. Everything was right in the analysis. We had Brock Purdy as the quarterback. He ended up being the quarterback in the Millie Maker, but we had him stacked with Kittle instead of Samuel. And Samuel was dirt cheap last week too, which is what was the bigger, like kick in the ass. But same thing versus Seattle a couple weeks ago. I had Kittle in that game too over Samuel, and Samuel in that game ended up getting 22 and a half DraftKings points. But the same reason I like Kittle in that matchup a couple weeks ago is why I like Kittle again this week, and that's because versus Seattle, Kittle has been like a killer of Seattle. Scored 4 touchdowns in the 2 games prior to last week. So, Kittle with his roller coaster ride of Kittle, like it's might be a better week for Samuel, but don't be surprised if we see Kittle pop off this week. And let's see what his ownership is, because really it's the ownership that should dictate what you do with Kittle. 7% ownership this week, so he's really not going to be that bad from an ownership perspective, but he's pretty expensive at 5,900. And if we look at what Kittle's done lately, it hasn't been much. He popped off for a few weeks in a row there, and then he's disappeared the last 2 weeks. But this has Kittle game written all over it, even though I'm hesitant to go there this week. But it's just more a recency bias thing than anything else. But don't be surprised if Kittle goes off this week. I don't hate the stack this week. I think that DK Metcalf is in a good spot. The San Francisco 49ers are giving up 23.2 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. So, yeah, I do like Metcalf. And we saw, Metcalf's upside finally last week. 40 DraftKings points last week. Other than that, he hadn't really done too much. But last game versus San Francisco, he only had 6 DraftKings points. So, it's a tough it's a tough game to kind of commit to, but there are the weapons in this game. I do like the Buffalo Kansas City game a lot better, though. We'll take a look at that game. Now, the narrative all year has been about how good Kansas City's defense is, and they've been great. But this is a game against Josh Allen, who is in a down year. So you have all these things kind of culminating against Josh Allen this year to take people off of this spot where they would normally be like jam them in. We're going to start off with Josh Allen in our lineups this week, and let's kind of see where we can go from there. I like Steph Diggs. It's not a Gabe Davis week. It's a situation where the coverage is not going to be in Davis's favor, and they're on the road. 2 strikes against Davis for me. I do like Diggs, though. I like Diggs in this matchup. I think he's a guy that can beat, he can beat the matchup. And Buffalo has a good matchup in the slot, with Kansas City giving up 21.7 DraftKings points a game to the slot receiver, and Diggs runs the majority of his routes from the slot, 37%. I know that Kansas City will be keying in on Diggs, but Diggs is a guy that you're not overly concerned with matchup. But keep him in mind. Khalil Shakir is another guy that I like in that slot matchup. Shakir, I can see him going off this week, and he probably will be low owned as well. Let me take a look real quick. See what his ownership is. 1% ownership. I mean, these guys on Buffalo's side, they've just been forgotten about. He's at a $3,900 salary. He's an easy plug-in. On the Kansas City side, there's really no one that I want to plug in except for Kelsey, and Kelsey might be too expensive. So, I'm going to continue building before I even decide on a Kansas City guy. I know that Kansas City is going to have to put up points in order for this game to be, like a shootout. But I don't think that you need to try to guess on who's going to do it, because it's probably going to be, Mahomes to some scrub. Like all of the wide receivers on that team are scrubs except for Rashee Rice. Rashee Rice is 5,400. So, I mean, that's affordable. So we can plug in Rashee Rice. But I think we gotta try to put in a defense next. So if I was looking at a defense, maybe I don't hate the Bears at 2,400 against Goff on the road in a division game. Rams versus Baltimore. Denver versus the Chargers isn't a bad matchup. Let's put them in. So we got 5,200 per position. Let's get our tight end in next. We're looking for value at the tight end position. I think we covered a couple guys: Jonnu Smith, Brevin Jordan, Tyler Conklin. They all have good matchups. If we look a little further down, Tanner Hudson is another guy. There's a lot of good options, cheap. Let's go with Tanner Hudson, because I think that we can stack him then with one of these Colts. But let's get our running backs in first. And this is a perfect one for Chase Brown. Maybe I use Chase Brown instead of Hudson. Maybe I use them both. Hudson. And let's go with who do we have on the Colts side? Oh, I was talking about Beckham, how I like Beckham. So let's take out Shakir there. Let's put in Beckham. Let's put in Shakir in the flex. This is with 9,800 for our final position. That gives us McCaffrey. So from a correlation standpoint, maybe not the most correlated, but if we put in McCaffrey and maybe we take out Brown, let's look at running backs in that $5,000 range. Got Pierce. We got Keaton Mitchell is interesting, although he's got a tougher matchup. Ty Chandler, he's in that range. But let's say we want to put Chase Brown in there. Let's get Chase Brown back in there. Let's get Hudson out. Maybe we take Shakir out. Maybe we put Hudson back in. I'm looking for a run back on the Colts to make this make a little bit more sense. So let me look in the flex for a Colt run back. Elijah Moore, we talked him up, or we talked up the Flacco matchup. Let's see, what do we got on the Colts side here? All right, if we wanted to go there, Sermon, we got Scott Evans. Where is Downs? If we wanted to put Downs, it's $4,900, so we need $400 somewhere. Rashee Rice, honestly, like I don't think I care if I have a run back there, but let's put Rashee Rice back in. Get Rice back in there. Let's take out McCaffrey and go down to Kamara. Talked about that pivot earlier. It gives us 600 to work with. And I don't hate this type of lineup at all. We could take the Broncos out, and that leaves us with more options for our defense. Although I still think I like the I don't hate the Vikings against the Raiders. Although the Raiders have been playing well, I don't hate the Raiders versus the Vikings either. So, that this type of lineup, we got our Indy Cincy game stacked. We got Buffalo and KC stacked. We don't have any representation from the 49ers game, but I don't necessarily hate that just because the 49ers game, that is a division game that could easily go south, and it could be one of those games where Seattle's playing for their playoff life. Maybe the defense steps up. We've seen San Francisco flounder a few times already this year, so that would not surprise me. But if we wanted to have that representation in there, we wanted to get McCaffrey in there. I think the best way to go is probably if we put McCaffrey in there and we look at defense here. I mean, we still got the Bears. I don't hate the Bears defense versus the Lions this week. Goff on the road, like I was saying. I mean, yeah, I don't hate that. And then this lineup makes a whole lot of sense. So I kind of like that lineup. So this is a direction you can go. We got Josh Allen to Stephon Diggs, running it back with Rashee Rice. We got Christian McCaffrey in there too. If we didn't want to run it back with Downs, we could put back in Shakir and not worry so much about the run back in that Kansas City game. Or you could look towards the tight end. Maybe if we take out Hudson, since we got Chase Brown in there, or actually, you know what? Let's put Hudson back in. Let's take out Chase Brown. Put in the defense. Let's say we want the Bears. Take out Chase Brown. Gives us 5,400 to work with. That's Charbonnet. Charbonnet is questionable. Get Keaton Mitchell as an option. I don't hate Keaton Mitchell. He was getting more work in the last game. And then you got Hunt in that decent matchup. He doesn't have an injury designation on him. Really hasn't done anything, though. But, he could pop off. But we have options here is the point. And Roschon Johnson, along with that Bears D. I don't hate that. So Roschon Johnson, like Chase Brown, you're punting the position at that point. You're hoping that one of these guys comes through. I could totally see that. I could totally see one of those guys coming through. They both have the matchups that we're looking for. But yeah, Keaton Mitchell is probably the guy that I'd roll with here. I kind of like his spot this week. So there's a Josh Allen build for you. Like if you want to go, let's say we want to go with a cheap stack. Let's go with one of those sub 500 guys. Let's go with Flacco. Let's say we run him back. We stack him with Cooper. Get that veteran connection in there. And we're playing Jacksonville, so let's run it back with somebody. Probably Washington would be the most interesting guy to run it back with. You know what? I'm gonna go a different direction. I'm gonna go with Garrett Wilson to Zach Wilson. Let's get Zach Wilson in there. Let's say that Jets come through. I think this game's more likely to have like a shootout potential than that other game. So let's run it back with Singletary. All right. So as far as the defense, let's put the Broncos in there. And for our other running back, let's get McCaffrey in there. Wide receivers. Wide receivers, I like. Let's put Diggs in there. Let's say that we want to keep that core game as our focus here. Let's get Rice. For tight end position, let's put Kelsey instead of Rice. Let's see if we can do something there. Yeah, no. So get Rice back in. If we want to go tight end after that point, San Francisco, we got represented in there. We got Houston. Maybe we go with Conklin. And we're double stacking a 30-point game, so maybe not the best idea to go there. Maybe we switch that back out. I don't hate Wilson this week, but let's look at Minshew because I like the options with like Pittman and guys like that a lot more. Instead of Diggs, let's put in Shakir. So we got Minshew. Let's put in Tanner Hudson there. This way, we're getting rid of positions that don't necessarily have like too many great matchups this week, but we're filling it with stacks. So we got like game stacks. We got Minshew to Pittman, which is a good matchups there on both sides. We got Hudson. We're running it back with good matchup there for Hudson. We got KC Buffalo in there. Little lower owned stack in there. We got 7,500 left to play with. If we wanted to take out Shakir and put in Diggs back in that direction, we can't do it. So, oops. Maybe we get rid of Rice. Maybe we just put Diggs in there and go with one of these cheap receivers that we were talking about. A few sub 500 guys like Beckham. We got Beckham in there. That leaves us with 4,200 at the flex. So, we have ways to go there. Don't like this lineup as much as I like that Josh Allen lineup, but like this is a direction that we can go. I don't hate it. Like we got Pittman, we got Diggs, we got McCaffrey, we got Singletary. So I feel like it's a solid lineup all around. Just that 4,200 guy that we're going to have to find. Let's look for a receiver because it's not going to be any answers in the running back spot there. Robert Woods, Osborne, Shakir. We could get Shakir in there. Got a few options. But that's a direction to go. If we want to try to force in that Zach Wilson, let's put Wilson in there. Let's take out Pittman and let's get Garrett Wilson in there. That leaves us with 6,700 in that spot. I think in that I want to go Brevin Jordan, a run back. And then that leaves us with 6,400. Oh, wait, I already got Singletary as a run back. Let's get Tanner Hudson back in there. And 6,700 can get us probably Josh Downs. He's only at 4,900. So I mean, we could put Josh Downs in there, and that we have our Indy Cincy stack. Then we have our like our solo guy in Beckham. Then we got Diggs. Diggs is another solo guy. So maybe we look more at Rice here. Get Rashee Rice in there. You put Rashee Rice in there, you got $1,000 to play with. Maybe we take out Beckham. We start looking at plays like this. Then we're like in that Downs range. If we wanted to use Downs as a run, like a guy opposite of Hudson, and dudes like that. So I mean that gives us a direction we can go. If you want to swap it out for Flacco, don't hate that. Flacco, take out Wilson, we'll put in Cooper. That leaves us with 4,800 for our last spot. If we wanted to, where's Washington's price? Washington is 3K. I mean, 3K for the amount of work that dude was getting last week. That is super cheap. He got 6 targets last week. Guy felt like he was involved in every play of the game. I think he was even on special teams doing stuff too. I mean, he got a touchdown on top of it, 18 Draftkings points, and the best matchup on the Jacksonville side is that slot, and that is where we saw Washington running 72% of his routes. So interesting stuff there, but there's a few different directions. You probably have guys that you like plugging in better than me, but like think of it as a strategy standpoint. I would try to get that Buffalo game stacked though with Josh Allen, and then we have plenty of cheap wide receiver options this week. A couple cheap running back options, and obviously tight end and defense are cheap too, so it's doable with getting Allen to Diggs and Rashee Rice stacks in there. So that's it for this week. Hit subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm trying to get up to 300 subscribes before the end of the season. And you're going to want to subscribe because playoff best ball is my best game, apart from Showdown. And that is coming up next week. And I have called the brackets for the past couple of years. I've gotten a decent amount of the brackets right the last couple of years. Had the Cincinnati San Francisco was the Super Bowl that I called 2 years ago. Ended up being Cincinnati versus the Rams, but San Francisco made it to the division finals. Now, that year, neither Cincinnati or San Francisco was projected to go very far, if anywhere, because I started drafting the Bengals before the playoffs even started, and then they ended up, I think they won the division because I had a bet on them to win the division too. So ended up being a good year there. But, this year, a lot of good teams in there that are undervalued right now because of current perceptions of those teams. People are locked in on recency bias, and that is a perfect thing to take advantage of. If you can, take a look at the ESPN bracket and kind of project your own, like wins for the next 4 weeks on these teams and figure out, who is going to go into the playoffs and who their matchups are going to be in week 1 of those playoffs. And then you can kind of build your projections for the playoff best ball from there. But it's a fun game to play. And, it's probably my favorite game to play besides Showdown. So looking forward to that starting. And other than that, hit the like button on this video. Get me to 15 likes, and I'll try to put out a short video tomorrow at some point before lock with my favorite plays on the slate. But other than that, subscribe, and I'll be back tomorrow with the Showdown Show. Thanks, guys.